Power is a funny thing. One minute, a billionaire is laughing you out of a boardroom because your thrift store blazer smells like cheap baby formula. The next, he's sitting at your sticky diner table, a multi-million-dollar contract in hand, begging you to put a ring on his finger. Polyester has a specific, unforgiving texture. It doesn't breathe, it doesn't stretch, and it certainly doesn't look like it belongs on the 64th floor of Reed Capitol. Maeve Brooks sat perfectly straight in the waiting area, ignoring the way the cheap fabric of her skirt dug into the backs of her thighs. She had spent $12 on this navy suit at a Goodwill in Queens. She spent another $4 on a stain remover pen to scrub a faint coffee mark off the lapel. To the casual observer, she looked professional. To the men and women walking past her in bespoke wool and imported silk, she looked exactly like what she was, an intruder. She focused her eyes on the frosted glass double doors ahead of her. Behind them was a senior analyst position. Behind them was a salary that could pull her out of the suffocating debt she had drowned in for 3 years. More importantly, behind those doors was the premium health insurance that would finally cover her 6-year-old son's pediatric cardiology bills. Landon's heart defect didn't care about her pride. It didn't care that she was running on 4 hours of sleep and half a piece of toast. It only required money. "Mr. Reed will see you now," a receptionist murmured, barely glancing up from her monitor. Maeve stood, smoothed her skirt, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. The corner office was vast, sterile, and cold. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, godlike view of the Manhattan skyline. Behind a slab of black marble that served as a desk sat Dominic Reed. He was 32, ruthlessly handsome, and entirely absorbed in the glowing screen of his phone. He didn't look up when she walked in. He didn't gesture for her to sit. Maeve stood awkwardly for a long, agonizing minute. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sharp, rhythmic tapping of Dominic's thumbs against his screen. Finally, he tossed the phone onto the marble. It landed with a sharp clack. He leaned back in his leather chair and looked at her. His eyes were a pale, icy blue, and they scanned her from the scuffed toes of her sensible pumps to the tight, anxious line of her shoulders. "Maeve Brooks," he said. His voice was smooth, but entirely devoid of warmth. He dragged a slim manila folder across his desk and opened it. "Your technical tests were flawless. Your market predictions in the simulation were aggressive, accurate. Thank you, Mr. Reed. I've followed Reed Capital's acquisition strategies closely, and I believe—" "But," he interrupted, cutting her off with the casual ease of a man who was used to doing all the talking. He flipped a page. "You have a 3-year gap in your employment history. From 2023 until last month, you dropped off the grid entirely." Maeve kept her voice steady. "I had a family medical emergency. It required my full attention as a primary caregiver. The situation has stabilized, and I am ready to re-enter the workforce full-time." Dominic scoffed. It was a small, sharp sound. He closed the folder and tossed it aside, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "A family emergency. Let me guess. A sick child?" "Yes." "Ms. Brooks, do you know what we do here?" "You restructure distressed assets." "I dissect them," Dominic corrected, his tone dropping into a deadly serious register. "I buy dying companies, carve out the rot, and sell the functional organs to the highest bidder. It requires 80-hour weeks. It requires answering my calls at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. It requires a singular, obsessive focus." He gestured dismissively toward her. You don't have that. You have a distraction at home. You have a gap in your resume that tells me when things get difficult, you leave the market to play nurse. Maeve felt a hot flush of anger rise in her chest, battling with the cold panic of losing the job. Taking care of my son wasn't a vacation, Mr. Reed. It required more logistical management, crisis negotiation, and endurance than closing any deal. Perhaps, Dominic said, checking a silver Patek Philippe watch on his wrist. But it doesn't make me money. I need sharks. I need people who are hungry for success. He paused, letting his eyes drift over her worn suit again. You aren't hungry for success. You're just hungry. I can smell the desperation on you, Ms. Brooks. You want a paycheck to survive. That makes you cautious. Cautious analysts lose my money. I am highly qualified, Maeve insisted, her voice tight but unwavering. My desperation, as you call it, means I will outwork anyone else in this building because I cannot afford to fail. And when your kid gets a fever or needs another surgery, you'll walk out at 2 p.m. Dominic stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. The interview was over. Reed Capital is an investment firm, not a charity for struggling single mothers. HR will validate your parking. Maeve didn't move for a second. The dismissal hung in the air, heavy and humiliating. She looked at this man, a man who had inherited his initial fortune, who had never known what it meant to count out quarters at a pharmacy counter, who wore his privilege like armor. She picked up her bag. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. Instead, she offered him a smile that was completely devoid of humor. You mistake privilege for work ethic, Mr. Reed, Maeve said softly. I survive more before 8 a.m. than you do in an entire fiscal quarter. Good luck finding your sharks. She turned and walked out, keeping her spine rigid until she reached the elevator. Only when the metal doors slid shut did she lean against the wall, close her eyes, and let out a shaky, terrified breath. She had $30 in her checking account. 72 hours later, arrogance gave way to mathematics. Dominic Reed stood by the same floor-to-ceiling windows in his office, staring out at the city, holding a tumbler of scotch he had poured at 10 a.m. Behind him, pacing the length of the Persian rug, was Harrison, his chief legal counsel. The board convenes tomorrow at noon, Dominic. This isn't a negotiation. It's a hard clause, Harrison said, his voice fraying with anxiety. Dominic took a slow sip of the amber liquid. It's an antiquated joke. My grandfather wrote that will in the 1980s. Your grandfather built this empire, and he wanted it run by a stable family man. Those were his exact words, Harrison snapped, stopping to tap a thick legal binder on the marble desk. The morality and succession clause is airtight. You must be legally married by your 32nd birthday to inherit his controlling shares. You turn 32 tomorrow. I am the CEO. I multiplied the company's valuation by 5. And you only hold 30% of the voting shares. The trust holds 40. If you aren't married by tomorrow, those shares default to your Uncle Richard. He already has 30%. He will fire you before the ink is dry on the transfer. Dominic closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. He knew Harrison was right. Richard had been circling like a vulture for years, waiting for Dominic to slip up. Dominic had a plan, of course. He always had a plan. He had drawn up an ironclad, highly lucrative contract for his casual girlfriend, a socialite who understood the transactional nature of their world. But yesterday, Her lawyer had returned the contract with a demand for 50% of his liquid assets and permanent alimony. When Dominic refused, she walked. "We find someone else," Dominic said coldly. "Offered $10 million. Flat fee. 1 year of marriage. Uncontested divorce." "Who?" Harrison threw his hands up. "We have 24 hours. We can't just pick a woman out of a catalog. She has to pass a basic background check. She has to be someone who won't immediately run to the press. And more importantly, she has to be someone who will sign a bulletproof prenuptial agreement without dragging it through courts for months." Dominic turned away from the window. His mind raced, calculating variables, stripping away emotion to find the purely logical solution. He needed a woman who was pragmatic, a woman who understood transactions, a woman who despised him enough that there would be zero risk of emotional entanglement or messy post-divorce complications. Most importantly, he needed a woman who was desperate enough for cash right now to sign anything he put in front of her. A memory flashed in his mind. Navy polyester, a worn stain on a lapel, cold, angry eyes, a sick child. "I can smell the desperation on you." "Get me the file on the analyst candidate from Tuesday," Dominic ordered, setting his glass down. "The one with the gap in her resume." Harrison frowned. "Maeve Brooks. I saw the notes. You eviscerated her." "Exactly," Dominic said, a sharp, calculating gleam in his eye. "Find out where she is right now." The neon sign of the Silver Spoon Diner buzzed with a sound like dying insects. It was 11:45 p.m. Maeve pushed a damp rag across a sticky Formica table, her lower back screaming in protest. She had picked up the night shift to keep the lights on, leaving Landon with a neighbor. The air smelled of stale coffee, burnt onions, and bleach. The bell above the diner door chimed. "Take a seat anywhere. I'll be right with you," Maeve called out, not looking up as she scrubbed at a hardened patch of syrup. "I'm not here for the pie, Ms. Brooks." Maeve froze. The voice was unmistakable, smooth, authoritative, and entirely out of place in a run-down diner in Brooklyn. She straightened up, brushing a strand of frizzy hair out of her face, and turned around. Dominic Reed stood in the aisle. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit that probably cost more than the entire diner. He looked at the cracked vinyl booths and the flickering fluorescent lights with a mild clinical disgust. Maeve felt her heart hammer against her ribs, but she locked her jaw. "If you're here to critique my waitressing resume, Mr. Reed, you'll have to wait in line. My section is closed." Dominic didn't smile. He slid into the booth she had just finished cleaning, sitting rigidly against the worn vinyl. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick document bound in a blue legal cover, and placed it perfectly in the center of the table. "Sit down, Ms. Brooks. I have tables to bus. If you aren't ordering, leave." "I'm offering you a job," Dominic said quietly. Maeve let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Really? Did the Wharton graduates complain about the 80-hour weeks? Did you decide you needed a desperate mother after all?" "I need a wife." The words hit the air and just hung there. Maeve stared at him, the wet rag dripping slightly onto the linoleum floor. She waited for the punchline, for the cruel smirk, but Dominic's face was deadpan. "Excuse me?" Dominic tapped the document. "This is a non-disclosure agreement and a prenuptial contract. Tomorrow's my 32nd birthday. Due to an archaic family trust, I will lose control of my company at noon if I am not legally married. I don't have time to date. I don't have time to negotiate with socialites who want a permanent cut of my empire." He leaned forward, his icy blue eyes locking onto hers. "I remembered you. You are intelligent, you are cynical, and you clearly despise me, which makes you the safest investment I can make right now." Maeve slowly sank into the booth opposite him. Her brain struggled to process the sheer audacity of the man sitting across from her. "You want me to marry you? For money? After you humiliated me in your office?" "I humiliated you because you were wrong for my analytics team," Dominic said, his tone entirely matter-of-fact. "But you are perfectly suited for this. You need money for your son. I need a signature on a marriage certificate." He opened the folder and pushed it toward her. "The terms are simple. We stay married for 12 months. You move into my penthouse so it looks legitimate to the board. We make a handful of public appearances. We sleep in separate rooms. We live separate lives. At the end of the year, we divorce quietly, citing irreconcilable differences." Maeve stared at the crisp white paper. "You are insane. I am a pragmatist." Dominic reached into his pocket and pulled out a cashier's check. He placed it on top of the contract. $2 million. $1 million deposited into an escrow account tomorrow morning. The second $1 million upon the finalization of the divorce. Fully tax-free. I will also cover premium, top-tier medical insurance for you and your son for life. Maeve stopped breathing. She looked at the check. The zeros blurred together. $2 million. It was a phantom number. It was a number that didn't exist in her world of past due notices and agonizing pharmacy visits. It was a new heart for Landon. It was a house with a backyard. It was the absolute end of her terror. She looked up from the check, her eyes meeting Dominic's. She hated him. She hated his calm certainty that money could buy anything, even a human being. But she loved her son more than she hated Dominic Reed. Maeve reached across the table and picked up the check. She folded it precisely in half. $3 million, she said, her voice dropping to a low, hard pitch. Dominic raised an eyebrow. $3 million, Maeve repeated, leaning forward. And you do not interfere with my parenting. You do not speak to my son unless I permit it. You do not dictate what I wear, where I go, or how I spend my time outside of your mandatory corporate circus. And if you ever speak to me the way you did in your office again, I will walk out and you will lose your company." Dominic studied her face for a long, silent moment. The faint trace of a genuine smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "The deal," he said. He pulled a heavy silver pen from his inside pocket and handed it to her. "Sign on the dotted line. Future Mrs. Reed." Cardboard boxes looked like a disease spreading across the vast expanse of Dominic's white oak flooring. Maeve unpacked in silence. She had brought very little. 3 boxes of clothes, 1 box of kitchen supplies she refused to leave behind, and 4 boxes of Landon's things. Books, mostly. Legos. And a heavy plastic bin of medical equipment, a portable oxygen concentrator, blood pressure monitors, and neat rows of orange prescription bottles. Dominic stood near the kitchen island, nursing a black coffee. He watched the boy. Landon was 6, but he carried the quiet, heavy stillness of an old man. He didn't run around the penthouse. He didn't touch the expensive, sharp-edged modern art pieces scattered across the living room. He just sat on the rug, methodically clicking 2 red Lego bricks together, his breathing shallow and slightly labored. His skin had a faint translucent pallor. "He's quiet," Dominic stated. It wasn't a compliment or a complaint, just an observation. Maeve didn't look up from the box she was emptying. "He knows how to conserve his energy. His heart doesn't pump efficiently enough to allow for tantrums. Dominic took another sip of coffee. The reality of the contract was settling in. He had a wife. He had a sick child in his pristine, silent fortress. He had secured his company, outmaneuvered his Uncle Richard at the board meeting that morning, and kept his empire intact. Yet looking at the cheap cardboard boxes resting on his imported rugs, he felt a strange, tightening sensation in his chest. A loss of control. "My assistant has scheduled the first public appearance for next Friday," Dominic said, shifting into business mode. It was safer there. A charity gala for the pediatric wing of Mount Sinai. Optically, it aligns perfectly with your situation. It makes a sudden marriage look like a whirlwind romance built on shared philanthropic values. "Fine," Maeve said. She folded a faded sweater and set it on the couch. "Do I need to buy another dress from Goodwill, or does the $3 million cover a wardrobe budget?" "A stylist is coming tomorrow at 9. You will wear what she selects." Dominic set his mug down with a sharp clink. "And keep the medical equipment out of sight. If Richard comes snooping, I don't want this place looking like a hospice ward." Maeve stopped moving. She stood up slowly, turning to face him. The air in the room seemed to freeze. "My son's medical equipment," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying whisper, "will go exactly where he needs it to go. If he needs oxygen in the living room, the tank sits in the living room. If he needs a monitor in the kitchen, it stays in the kitchen." She walked toward him, not stopping until she was inches from his chest. She had to tilt her head up to meet his eyes, but she didn't look small. She looked lethal. "I sold you my name, Dominic. I sold you my public image. I did not sell you my child's comfort or his safety. If Uncle Richard doesn't like the aesthetic of a sick child's reality, he can look at the wall. Do you understand me?" Dominic stared down at her. He was used to people shrinking from him. He was used to sycophants and terrified juniors. He had never had someone stand in his personal space and threaten him over the placement of an oxygen tank. He looked at the fierce, unblinking fire in her eyes. He recognized it. It was the exact same ruthless, uncompromising drive he used to crush rival firms. She was a shark. She just swam in different waters. "Understood," he said softly. A week passed. They lived like ghosts, haunting the same house. Dominic left before 6 in the morning and returned past 10 at night. Maeve managed Landon, coordinated his upcoming surgery with the new top-tier insurance, and read financial journals in the dark after the boy fell asleep. Then came Thursday night. Dominic woke up at 2 in the morning to get a glass of water. As he walked down the dark hallway, he saw a sliver of light spilling from the kitchen. He stopped. Maeve was sitting on the floor, leaning against the bottom cabinets. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt, her knees pulled up to her chest. Landon was asleep in her lap. She had a stethoscope pressed to his small, fragile chest. Her eyes were closed, her face tight with a quiet, agonizing concentration. She was counting his heartbeats. Dominic didn't move. He watched her mouth silently form the numbers. 1, 2, miss, 3, 4. He watched the raw, unfiltered terror wash over her face, followed instantly by a steel-trap suppression of that fear. She took a deep breath, adjusted his sleeping position, and stroked his hair. She wasn't weak. She was holding up the sky with one hand. Dominic backed away silently, retreating to his bedroom. For the first time in his life, the millions sitting in his offshore accounts felt entirely useless. Camera flashes exploded like lightning against the damp pavement outside the Pierre Hotel. Dominic stepped out of the Blacktown car and offered his hand. Maeve took it. When she stepped onto the curb, the paparazzi surged forward. She didn't flinch. The stylist had earned her fee. Maeve wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that draped perfectly over her frame. Her hair was swept back, her makeup sharp and elegant. She looked like old money. She looked like she belonged. Dominic placed a hand on the small of her back. He felt the tension coiled in her muscles. "Smile," he murmured near her ear. "Just breathe. We do the red carpet, we endure the dinner, we leave." "I know how a transaction works, Dominic," she whispered back, flashing a radiant, completely fake smile for a photographer. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of velvet and diamonds. The air hummed with the quiet, dangerous hum of wealth. Dominic navigated the room flawlessly, introducing Maeve to board members, investors, and politicians. She played her part perfectly. She was charming, demure, and gave vague, romantic answers about how they met through mutual financial interests. Then halfway through the evening, Dominic was pulled away by a frantic junior partner. Maeve found herself alone near the ice sculpture. "Ms. Brooks, or should I say, Mrs. Reed?" Maeve turned. Richard Reed stood there, swirling a martini. He was older, thicker, and possessed a smile that looked like a scar. "Richard," Maeve said, keeping her voice even. "It's a pleasure." "Is it?" Richard took a step closer, his eyes raking over her dress. "You know, Dominic is a clever boy. He always has been. When I heard he eloped with an unemployed single mother the day before his trust dissolved, I had my doubts. It felt sloppy." Maeve kept her face entirely neutral. "Dominic doesn't do sloppy. No, he doesn't. He does desperate." Richard leaned in, his breath smelling of gin. "I had my people look into you, Maeve. 3 years out of the market. Drowning in medical debt. A kid with a bad heart. It's a very tragic story. I wonder how much he paid you. 1 million. 2. Panic flared in Maeve's chest, hot and bright. The contract had a breach clause. If the fraud was exposed, she lost the money. She lost Landon's surgery. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said coldly. "I'm talking about taking this to the SEC. I'm talking about voiding his shares for fraud," Richard hissed. "Unless you want to be smart, walk away tonight. Confess it's a sham. I'll double whatever he's paying you." Maeve looked at Richard. She saw the greed. She saw the absolute certainty that he could buy her compliance just like Dominic had. She remembered the nights sleeping in hospital chairs. She remembered Dominic backing down in the living room, respecting her boundary. She took a slow sip of her sparkling water. "Double it?" Maeve asked softly. "With what liquidity, Richard?" Richard blinked. "Excuse me?" Maeve took a step toward him, her voice dropping into a razor-sharp register. "You just over-leveraged your personal capital by $40 million to short the tech sector, and the market rallied yesterday. Your margin calls are coming due by Tuesday. You don't have $6 million in cash to bribe me. You don't even have the capital to keep your own yacht from being repossessed next week." Richard's face drained of color. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. "Dominic and I share everything," Maeve lied smoothly, holding his gaze, "including his forensic analysis of your portfolio. If you ever threaten my family again, or if you bring up my son's medical history in this town, I won't just let Dominic vote you off the board. I will personally draft the press release detailing your insolvency." She smiled warmly, a terrifying, beautiful expression. "Enjoy the veal, Uncle Richard." Maeve turned and walked away. Her legs were shaking beneath the silk gown, but her posture was flawless. She pushed through the heavy doors to a quiet terrace overlooking Central Park, desperate for cold air. She gripped the stone railing, closing her eyes, trying to force her heart rate down. The heavy terrace door clicked open behind her. "He looked like he was going to vomit." Dominic's voice cut through the quiet night air. Maeve didn't turn around. "He threatened the contract. He threatened the money. I handled it." Dominic walked up beside her. He leaned against the railing, looking at her profile in the dim light. "How did you know about his margin calls? I didn't tell you that." "You leave your quarterly reports on the kitchen island," Maeve said, staring out at the trees. "I read them when I can't sleep." It wasn't hard to piece together his exposure. "He's careless." Dominic fell silent. He looked at the city skyline, the empire he had fought so brutally to keep. Then he looked at the woman beside him. He thought about her in the navy polyester suit. He thought about her sitting on the kitchen floor, counting a failing heartbeat. He thought about her dismantling a billionaire with nothing but publicly available data and sheer nerve. "You are entirely wasted as a prop," Dominic said quietly. Maeve let out a dry laugh. "I'm a $3 million prop. I'll survive." "No." Dominic turned to face her fully. "The contract is over." Maeve's head snapped toward him, panic instantly flooding her veins. "What? No. We had a deal, Dominic. You can't back out. Landon's surgery is next month." "Landon is getting the surgery," Dominic interrupted, his voice firm but surprisingly gentle. "The money is yours. I'm not breaking the deal to ruin you, Maeve. I'm breaking it because I don't want a fake wife anymore." Maeve stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. "What are you saying?" Dominic reached into his jacket. He didn't pull out a contract. He just looked at her, stripping away the armor, the arrogance, the CEO facade. He looked entirely human. "I'm saying you were right," Dominic confessed. "In my office. You told me I mistook privilege for work ethic. You told me I didn't know what survival looked like. You were right." He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was electric, startlingly tender. "I don't want a transaction anymore, Maeve. I want a partner. In the boardroom. And here." He stepped closer. "I want to be there when Landon wakes up from surgery. I want you to take the senior analyst position. I want to rip up the prenuptial agreement." Maeve searched his eyes. She looked for the trap, for the calculation, for the catch. But all she saw was a terrifying, quiet sincerity. "That's a very high-risk investment, Mr. Reed," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Dominic smiled. It was a real smile, reaching all the way to his icy blue eyes, melting them completely. "I told you," he said softly. "I only invest when I'm certain of the returns." If you felt the raw tension and emotion in Maeve and Dominic's story, hit that like button. Their journey proves that real power isn't about bank accounts. It's about resilience, love, and fighting for who you care about. Don't miss out on more gripping human stories like this. Share this video with your friends who love a fierce underdog, and subscribe to our channel for new, highly emotional drama stories every single week. See you next time.